day, another project. Now if you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and on this channel I like to talk about anything aquatic related, pond plants, pond wildlife, pond equipment, and I particularly like to cover restorations and installations that I do through the season's work. Today starts the beginning of a new project. This is a very familiar story. It's an old pond. The pond liner has given up, so the pond's being relined, and in the process it's a fantastic opportunity to make a few tweaks and a few design changes and to address a few issues of the pond. So we've got this wonderfully formal paved area around the pond, fantastic for entertaining, and the pond itself is going to be a real focal point of this area once it's been completed. It's been here for many years. I've been familiar with it for quite some time, having serviced it in the past, and the liner's been patched and repaired before, but sadly it's beyond repair now and it really needs to be replaced fully. So some of the areas that are going to be addressed, the pond itself is going to be increased in volume slightly, made a little bit deeper. The typical shelving all around the edge is going to be incorporated so that we can get some stonework in the pond to conceal the edges of the pond liner. And something that's been really lacking in this pond is just an area to grow some marginal plants. We've got two different depths here, but no planting shelves at all. So we're going to incorporate some planting zones. This particular area here of the pond is a bit of a nothing area. It's planted, there's a bit of grass here, but it's not accessible at all, particularly with this little bit of picket fencing here. So the pond's going to be enlarged and it's going to incorporate this area as a little beach and then a large planting zone. Make maintenance in the future much easier, and it'll be a nice little feature, a nice aspect to the pond. So up at the back of the pond here we've got a couple of falls. There's a header pool and a stream that enters the pond at one side, and beneath all of this undergrowth there's a second cascade that enters the pond. And as part of this job we're going to restore the falls, but we're going to really essentially focus on the one cascade as a main feature entering the pond, and this one here, which is overgrown, we'll put back to planting. There's a lot of materials that we can reclaim on this job, a lot of stonework that's going to be useful, and a lot of planting that we're going to want to keep and put back to surround the pond. There's also a lot of plants that we definitely want to get rid of. There's a lot of this Carex razor grass creeping through everything, and we want to try and get rid of as much of that as possible, otherwise that really will take over the pond in the future. It's a little bit nippy, there's a definite chill in the air. I need to start unloading my equipment and warming up. Let's get started. So behind the scenes there's always a lot of mucking about with cameras and tripods and microphones, so I'm just rigging up a setup as the time lapse that I'll position in one position, and it'll stay there for the entire duration of the job so that we can time lapse the whole thing. That's all of my regular viewers and subscribers, welcome back. And I just want to thank you very, very much for all of your support. Last week the channel just rolled over the 10,000 subscriber mark, which is incredible. So whoever was the 10,000 subscriber, thank you so much, you're a legend. And I'm very appreciative of your ongoing support. Thank you. Now there's not a lot of water in here that I want to salvage. And in fact the pond has been left pretty empty for a long time, but there's still a huge amount of wildlife that I want to hang on to. I set up a small holding tank just so we can put everything in, and already I am seeing lots and lots of dragonfly larvae, ram's horn snails, newts, a pig randomly. So I want to try and hang on to as much of that as possible. Some of these dragonflies are lovely. Oh, here we go. Just in a few seconds, so we've got a nice little male smooth newt with his lovely orange tummy, spotty tummy at the moment. So newts at this time of year would be breeding, which is why he's in his sort of full garb, his full intense colours. Ram's horn snails are brilliant. One of the few aquatic snails that you really want to encourage in a pond. Fantastic at eating a lot of decaying foliage and algae, and a perfect living modern sort of ammonite. Lovely. And look at these chaps, great big dragonfly larvae. These look very fierce and kind of alien. And the dragonflies will spend the majority of their life in this nymph stage in the pond for a few years, and then they'll emerge. This one will emerge at some point this year. I can see its wings already forming, so later on it will crawl up a piece of emerging foliage and it will break through its exoskeleton and unfurl its wings and dry them off and then disappear off as its adult stage of life. These are lovely things, and these aren't going to survive out of water. So the dragonfly and damselfly larvae I want to try and hang on to as much as possible, and they'll need to stay in the tank. Any amphibians I find, they can disappear off in the undergrowth and they'll work their way back into the pond at a later stage. Tons of newts. Oh, I have to say, I am not feeling pond fit. First proper job of the season. Oh, and it's warm as well. But I'm making good progress in clearing the pond. So initially, I need to get right the way back to the peripherals, the edging of the old pond liner, get out all the plants, all of the rocks and bits and pieces, so I can actually see what excavation I've got to work with. The plants over the years have really started to take a hold. Lots of this horrible carex, or a type of sedge, has grown through the pond and is run through everything, and it's got a very, very fine fibrous root structure that's very difficult to kind of penetrate with any tools. So it's a difficult plant to manage. And then another plant here which actually is very nice, and I want to hang on to as much of this as possible. It's a type of umbrella plant. It's got this fantastic rhizome that creeps over things, and then it sends up these flower spikes very early in the season, and then these nice broad leaves, a bit like a miniature gunnera or a rhubarb plant, very similar. So that's nice, but it's all coming out. I need to get cleared up. There's a lot of spoil in the pond, and I'm nearly all the way round. Just been handed a cold drink with some ice. That I'm very grateful for. Oh, jeepers creepers. That was lucky. Whew. I cannot believe how much rock has gone into this. Apart from some formal stone around the front edge of the pond, I've definitely got enough raw material to be working with. But I'm very familiar with lugging rocks. Lugging rocks and digging, that seems to be what I do. Why aren't I built like Arnold Schwarzenegger? Nicely established, this rock as well. Lots of moss and nice things growing on it, which will help to make sure that this, when it's built, is going to look established immediately. Yeah, no. Annoyingly, the rocks are getting bigger. Right, that's going to be a tough one to get out on my own. Right, all you're going to hear is a lot of huffing and puffing. Let's see what we can do here. Not a lot by the look of it. That's going to need a little bit of careful levering, I think. It's a bit beyond me carrying that one. Right, manageable now. That'll be the death of me, this job. Right, it's day 2 on the job. I think yesterday moving that very, very large rock and shifting it up here was a suitable point to stop for the day and have a tidy up. So today I'm just going to continue clearing up a lot of undergrowth, a lot of weeds and vegetation that needs to come out, just so I can improve overall visibility and access all the way around the pond. I'd also like to crack on with getting the stream taken out today. There's a lot of stonework there that needs to get broken up and removed, and just start to provisionally sort of build up the area that will become the beach and the planting zone. So get that section dug out as well. Feel a bit brighter and a bit fitter today. I think yesterday broke me in. I'd say gently, but it wasn't so gently. Weather's going to be good today, so it should be a good day to make some good progress. So I've just unearthed the old filtration system. We've got a pressurised Laguna filter in UV here, pressure flow 12,000. It's a nice piece of kit, this. I use these a lot, or I used to use these a lot on smaller ponds when I worked in the water gardens as a sort of cheaper alternative to the more premium brands like Awaza. The Laguna pressure flow, I think, was my next sort of favourite filter. This is going to be upgraded. Ultimately, again, spending a bit of money on this and making this into such a focal point as it's in such a prominent position. The filtration is key. So this is going to get upgraded to a bigger system. Again, Awaza. Filter clear. I like the pressurised systems for smaller ponds like this. Very convenient because they can be positioned anywhere lower than pond level or higher than pond level. But one little tip when you bury it in the ground is don't get it buried quite as deep as this. You need to be able to access the opening mechanism for future maintenance, and you don't really want to be digging it out every time you do so. So this really wants to have been positioned 4 or 5 inches higher in the ground. Laguna, I don't know why you've done this, and I don't know if you've done it elsewhere, but certainly in the UK, you are only distributing now to one chain, Maidenhead Aquatics, which is a real shame, and I think you're shooting yourself in the foot, because a lot of smaller independent retailers like stocking your product. So I think that's a backward step. Now I'm also discovering lots of bare cables that are just buried in the ground. And really, again, that's a no-no. All of these sort of things want to be run through a protective conduit. Obviously, if you're doing any work in the border and digging, the last thing you want to do is to damage a cable. But also chewing, rodents and squirrels can be a real pain and will come along and chew a cable. So putting it into a protective sheath is going to add another level of protection. And it also future-proofs the whole setup, that if you have to do any upgrades or replacements in the future, it's a lot easier to just pull that cable through the conduit and then replace it with a new one. That was a bit of a mission, but the filter's out. There was an old Y valve, a splitter, which meant that some of the water could get diverted through the stream, and some of it could be bypassing all of this and entering the pond via a pipe. And actually that's a very sensible thing to do, and that's something that I will also do when we rebuild this, although probably not using the old kit. So I'm just going to start to take apart the stream now. But this has been put together really nicely. The stonework fits very nicely, and it's very reminiscent of the sort of thing that I do. My only criticism with a stream like this is that it's been positioned too high, and it needs to go down and drop down further into the ground. The feeder pool here, the header pool, which is again a very good thing to do, it will fill up and gravity flow down the cascade, so it takes the speed, it takes the pressure away from the pump and makes the falls look and sound a lot more natural. But this is a very kind of classic thing that I see, in that the pond liner has been put down and the stonework has then sort of been put sitting on top of the edging. So there's always a little bit of visible pond liner, and in this instance the pond liner doesn't come up to the top of the stonework, it's flat underneath it. And that means there's very little margin for error. If you get a bit of blanket weed, a bit of moss or a few leaves blocking up the spills, the water level here will fill up sufficiently to then overflow underneath the cement and the stone and disappear out through the pond liner. When you sit and bed stonework on a bed of mortar, it's not waterproof. Yes, it's going to stop and prevent most of the water coming through and divert water where you want it, but it's not waterproof. So you've got to ensure that the pond liner is coming up, a few inches higher than the maximum level of the pond water, and the greater margin for error you can include, the better. If you look at the lie of the land, you can see Now, obviously this is the high point of the garden anyway. It slopes down that way and it slopes down this way, but the falls themselves are significantly higher than sort of ground level over here, which is never going to look natural. And there's a sufficient slope and gradient all the way around the pond to be able to drop this down, you know, a good foot or so, to ensure that the stonework here is kind of level with the general gradient, the general fall of the land, keeping the whole lot more natural. This is Max. Looks like he's having a good time. You enjoying yourself there, Max, hey? You funny boy. This is another fairly common mistake that I see, is inlets to the waterfall. So here the pipe has been laid discreetly and covered with stonework so the water can enter the feeder pool, the header pool at the top here, and flow down. But the water level, height in this pool is dictated by the height of this spill, and water is going to be probably 10 mil higher than this depending on flow rates. So you can see this depression where the pipework sits, to try and disguise it, this is actually lower than water level, so you're relying entirely on the cement, on the mortar, preventing water from flowing back through. And although it might be waterproof initially, give it a year or two and it will fail. Trying to have something cement based on top of a flexible piece of pond liner is only asking for trouble. So this piece of pipe, it has to come in higher than the maximum point that the water level can achieve. Either that, or you have to use a through liner connector, something like the Awaza tray ducts, so that you can create a waterproof seal and get the water coming up through from beneath. Woohoo! Nearly went. Not a nice day to be a pond man. I've got the surround of the pond all cleared now, and I'm at the stage where I can start to think about levels, digging down the outer shelving, bringing it down into the water so that when the stonework goes in the pond, that stone is sitting in the water itself, and that's going to conceal the edge of the pond liner. And then from there I can start to work out how deep down I need to dig the pond. It needs to get a little bit deeper because it's not deep enough at the moment. Got my laser rigged up and ready so I can start to mark out a level, and then I'll be working around the pond just using a straight manual level, scoring the sides and then digging down. What I'll end up doing is probably digging down 6 to 8 inches or so of soil below the level of the shelving. Now around the back of the pond it appears to be soil, but the front of the pond here, it looks like at some point during the initial construction a concrete collar had been put in. So I've got a little bit of concrete to cut through and dig out, which is going to slow progress down a little bit. Got my shelter rigged up. I've got an old bivvy tent up in the back of the garden to keep my electrics and tools and stuff dry. And hopefully it's not going to get any worse than this, but it's not as nice as last week. Never mind. The sun is shining again. Yesterday was a miserable day. Didn't really get an opportunity to get the camera out very much, and I spent most of it huddled underneath the gazebo, scraping away the edging of the pond. But today, much better weather, so I don't need to be under the shelter. I'm rocking my cruising carp t-shirt today. Trying out a few samples just to see what they look like with the Carpe Diem logo. So if you want to support the channel, click on the store button at the bottom of the page and you'll see lots of different examples of t-shirts and hoodies and other various merch that you can purchase. Because who doesn't want a mug with a fish on it, eh? This is the usual typical morning routine now, rigging up the cameras before I start the digging. So I've got my laser rigged up behind me, just sitting on the wall, which is nice and level. And I'm using that to help me ensure that this shelf I'm digging out is pretty level all the way around. So now and again I'm just taking some references from the laser, sticking a peg in, and I'll dig it down to that level, and then I can manually check and offer up to make sure that as I'm going round it's staying uniform. We've got pretty large margin for error here, some tolerances. This is underwater of course, but I want to make sure the stonework is sitting and starting all at the same level. This side of the pond, the ground is really solid. I guess the acer and the conifers here have been draining the soil and drying it up. But I've nearly done a complete ring, and once I've done that, it means I've got a level edge that I can refer to, and I will always know where the pond level, where the water level is going to be in reference to the marginal zones and the stonework. Gus is joining me this morning. Hello mate, what are you doing? Come on. Cheeky boy. Who's this? And so far, thankfully, I've not been plagued by too many roots. But hopefully, I haven't spoken too soon. Right, the good news, I've got a nice level shelf all the way around the pond. So now I can start doing the digging in the deeper part of the pond. The bad news is I got my new t-shirt dirty. Now I'm just working out what will be the maximum water level, and then from there working my way down to see how deep I have to dig. So I'm taking the lowest point of the raised walling here as the absolute maximum water level, but the idea is that the pond will be a fraction lower than that, and that gives the pond scope to hold a little bit more water during the rain before it overflows and then seeps into the surrounding border. So from there I want to go and have at least 600 deep in the deeper section. This is predominantly a wildlife pond, although there may well be introduction of some smaller goldfish or some rudd in the future. So we've got to make sure that it's deep enough to house fish. So I think in the deeper section I'm probably going to have to dig down at most a spade, probably about half a spade deep, and then I'm going to maintain that additional depth following the contours of the pond, the slope up into the shallow section over here. I like the way this has been dug and I want to maintain that, but just keep it a little bit deeper. What are you doing under there? Looks like I'm going to be digging just in very, very thick clay, which I like, especially at the moment because it's quite damp. And that means that I'll be able to keep the pond nice and neatly sculpted. But it will be important that I cover this over during hot weather until it's lined to make sure that the clay doesn't then shrink and crack. And all my hard work at keeping this looking neat and tidy will have gone to waste. So the pond's taking shape nicely. The bulk of the digging has been done. The level shelf created around the edge of the pond, and I've gone down a fair old depth to incorporate a deeper section at both ends of the pond. I'm just finishing off by going down here on this half about another 3 or 4 inches. But as is typical in this West Sussex area, I've just hit the bedrock, which is West Sussex sandstone, or Horsham stone as it's often known. Often it's in very shallow layers, and it just comes away in very thin bits of stone. I've built many a pond out of Horsham stone. It's a lovely material, but a bit of a pain to have to dig into. Once I've got this bit finished off, I can then start to dig down and make the planting zones a little bit deeper. So we've got one area here and one area at the back of the pond, and then the pond will be ready to have a measure up for the pond liner and fleece. And the next job from there is going to be to start working on that rear bank. I want to soften that what is essentially a sheer drop at the moment, and to create a bit more of a slope for the rockery and for a stream and a cascade, and then start to dig out a bit of a sort of a loose scraping to give me an idea of the shape of the falls and the position it's going to go. Weather's not looking great today. I've got my gazebo and the fishing body up already in anticipation, so I'll make the most of the dry weather for the time being. Right, that's the pond, pretty much dug out. I've done a couple of slightly deeper troughs at the planting zones. On this job, because it's very formal, surrounded by this lovely paving and walling, I wanted to make sure that all of the stonework started from the same depth, the same level. So where frequently on the marginal zones, where I wanted it to be a little bit deeper to accommodate a set amount of gravel for the plants to root into, and then making sure that there's enough depth that the gravel is covered by a few inches of water. In this instance, that would have meant dropping the section down here and having stonework starting from a lower position, or digging all of the shelving down to that depth. And I didn't want to do that because that means there's going to be a lot more stonework and a lot more material on this side, which you're not even going to see, so it's a waste of time. So instead, I've dug out some deeper troughs to make sure that we've got, 6 inches or so of gravel and a couple of inches of water above it. I'm not going to be too fussy just yet at tidying up in here or trimming down roots and bits and pieces. There's going to be a lot of spoil that's going to drop down from the rockery area to my left here. But my next job is going to be to start to landscape this slope. It's far too steep, far too vertical. It needs to drop back a little bit. And also I need to dig down some of the undulations to tie it in with the overall kind of lie of the land. The lawn itself has got this nice gradual slope, and then suddenly it hits this area here and then it goes all over the place. So I'll get that scraped away and get it evened out. And then I'm going to start to bring in a few rocks and just position them above ground on the soil, just so I can start to imagine the position of the stream and the angle of the falls and whereabouts it might enter the pond. And then I'll start digging out the cascade. The weather has been surprisingly kind to me. I've had a couple of showers, but nothing too drastic. So actually it's rather hot and sunny. Right, it's packing up time. It's been another very long day digging today. It's been a very active week, but I'm pleased with the progress. So I've made a great impression on the bank at the back, and just soften that ledge to create a nice kind of balanced slope. Dug away a bit more at the back so that it'll become more of a border, and to create a little bit more space for the feeder pool and for the stream. And I'm just starting to sort of tentatively chuck down a few rocks just to start to give me an impression in my mind of the position of the falls, the kind of angle, where the best place will be for the spill stone. Originally I was sort of toying with the idea of off to this side here, but actually from this position on the patio, which is where the seating is, where I've got the spill stone now, that's going to be a lot more visible. So I think that makes a bit more sense. There's a lot of old pond liner. You can see the edging of the liner where I've dug away the edging here, going up and down. It actually goes back an awfully long way. So I dug out a lot more of the bank than I intended, just to remove that lining, because it's not going to do the plants any good. I can't do the same over here, sadly, because that's going to disrupt too much of the root structure of these conifers and the acer. But I've got rid of most of it. So I'm going to pack up and think about going home. Oh, another morning of digging awaits me. I'm at that stage now where I'm just starting to get a bit achy. I can feel it in my forearms and the back of my legs, but it's a good feeling. So there's been a bit of a change of plan, and we're going to do a little bit more clearance than I'd originally anticipated, and we're going to get rid of all of these conifers up to the acer here as well. Not massively happy on the slope here. There's still lots and lots of pond liner underneath this lot, which I'd like to remove. So by getting rid of these, it means that we've got scope to then plant up the whole thing with some new planting, and to change the scheme, we can soften that slope and we can get rid of that pond liner. So, digging tools at the ready, and start to remove these. Plenty of root on that as well, which is good. Right, finally at the stage of measuring up for the pond liner. So I'm just using a flexible tape. You could do the same with a piece of string. And I'm just taking an approximate gauge from the longest point and the widest point. And I'm just following all of the contours of the excavation to give me an idea of the liner size. Now, depending on the shape of the pond, sometimes it might not be immediately obvious what is the longest point or the widest point. So take a few measurements, and if in doubt, be generous with a liner and go bigger than you think you need. Most definitely measure twice and cut once. Right, so I've just double checked, taken multiple measurements for the length and the width, and it always works out about the same. So we're talking about a liner just over 6 metre by 4 metre. And then from that measurement, I can work out how much pond fleece we need as well. Now, as ever, I'll be using the good people of Gordon Low, hello Gordon Low, to supply me with the liner and the fleece materials. I'll get that ordered up, and that should be with me at some point next week. Then we can start the build. So I've just made a couple of little tweaks, some alterations to the pond, which ultimately could have an effect on the measurements of the pond liner. So where the spills are going to go, we've decided to have 2 spills, 2 streams entering the pond, one over here and one over here. I just wanted to excavate a little bit of an inlet to make sure that I've got enough of an overhang. So when that spill stone, that final stone that the water pours over into the pond, it's got space and a cavity underneath it so that we can conceal lights, a few stones and bits and pieces just to add to the effect. But by doing that, that does of course increase slightly the width of the lining. So I'm just going to do a final measure up before I make my phone call and order that. And then it'll be a bit of a waiting game, waiting for the pond liner to arrive as I go and source some other materials and bits and pieces. So for the time being, I think this is a suitable ending for this chapter. I'll see you in part 2, but thanks very much for watching. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics. Thank you.